Hello everyone and welcome to our talk, 3 approaches to accessibility design in Squeakross Home Squeak Home. Before we dive in, I will introduce ourselves. I am Luka Lescuyer and the other presenter will be Alexandre Stroukoff. We're both using he/him pronouns. So we are 2 game developers with each around 15 years of experience in the gaming industry. We worked in various companies from small mobile teams to bigger AAA studio and console productions. In 2020, we founded Alblune. It's our own game studio. And we released 2 games, The Spirit and the Mouse, which is a small third-person adventure game, and Squeakross Home Squeak Home, a puzzle decoration game. And we also love rodents, if it wasn't obvious from our games' names. A quick overview of what we'll cover today. First, we'll do a small summary of what type of game is Squeakross. And then we'll discuss why you should care about accessibility as a developer. And we'll dive into how we approach accessibility implementation for our game. I will wrap it up with some takeaways. Let's start with what is Squeakross. Squeakross is a game where you solve logic puzzles called nonograms. There are logic puzzles where you fill cells to create an image. On the left, you can see a solved puzzle that transforms into a chair, for example. And after finishing that puzzle, you can place it in your rodent's home. Everything you get in-game comes from solving puzzles. So you can get furniture, rooms, costumes. This is the basic loop of Squeakross. Solve puzzles, decorate, and repeat. The puzzles you solved in Squeakross are called nonograms, and they are number-based puzzles. These are old puzzles, and they were popularized in video games by the Picross series since the Game Boy. It was started by the game called Mario's Picross on Game Boy. We love those kind of puzzles, but we often find that they are very lacking in accessibility and not very approachable by beginner players. But you might think, why make a niche puzzle game accessible? Our game has lots of decoration and customization elements. Player who wants to play for those features might not be familiar with the nonogram genre in general or just logic puzzles. We didn't want to make the game too frightening for them, especially since they involve lots of numbers. I've been a nonogram game player for many years now, and the more I played, the more I realized over the years that none of them really had accessibility features and they weren't evolving a lot, gameplay-wise. Whenever I tried to get a friend into nonograms, they always told me the games felt too scary or too hard to learn. I wanted to fix that by making a more inviting experience for beginners. And for us, this also passes through accessibility. We strongly believe that making our game more accessible by design will open the genre to new players. And as you can see from the beginning, this was our intent. This is a screenshot from our very first pitch deck. So, did all our effort to open the genre to new players worked? I would say yes. Here are many reviews from Steam page mentioning and praising the accessibility. It's also very interesting to note that many reviews mention Squeakross was their first nonogram game, or that it was the first one that helped them really understand the gameplay. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Alex to talk about how we designed the game with accessibility in mind from the start.
Thank you. So we've been saying accessibility a lot since the start, and that word has a lot of different meanings depending on the context. So I just wanted to quickly describe what it means for us. And for us, it mainly means making the game as frictionless as possible from the start. And this obviously goes for people with disabilities, but it also applies to all players, basically. We are not approaching it in a way where we make the game and then patch in accessibility with option on top of the game later on. Of course, we still have options that we will add later, but the approach here is to make the game accessible from the start, so it's baked in the game design. And to achieve this, this philosophy, we approach accessibility in 3 ways, and we try to split it in 3 ways for this talk. And the first way we approach accessibility is what we call the low-hanging fruits. That's mainly all the stuff that's really easy to design and think about. Then there is something we call breaking the convention, which require a bit more design effort, and like it says, it's doing the difficult exercise of breaking the convention of your genre for accessibility's sakes. And finally, there is the accessibility through innovation, meaning it's about designing brand new features, and through them we can reach new accessibility potentials that we didn't think about. You can also see those as layers, and I would say like layers, and the deeper you go, the more accessibility you can unlock, but it also means they are harder to implement. So let's start with the low-hanging fruits. This part is all about the surface level stuff that you interact with your game, and all the tiny frustrations that you can usually smooth out, and it can be inspired from daily life struggle. And an example I wanted to share here is something that has had a direct impact in Squeakross from Squeak Home, and it's how I use Google Sheet every day. And almost on a daily basis, there is something I really hate in Google Sheet, is that I struggle always to understand where am I in this table. And it's something that's really relevant to Squeakross or any puzzle game, because usually are interacting with like a big table or a grid. And so for me, this is the same kind of problem we have here. And what I end up doing in my daily life when I work, I usually end up installing a plugin basically that highlight exactly which row or line I'm in. And this is how Squeakross used to look like, and actually this is how many Picross game or nonogram game looks like, even like the industry standard ones, I will say. And with just like a tiny change like this that highlights the current row or column, it makes a world of difference. And even if player will not realize that it helps them, it's something they interact for hundreds of hours, and it really makes the game just overall feel just better to play. Another kind of low-hanging fruit, so like easy win for accessibility, is just making sure that all the interactions the player does in the game have really clear and unique feedbacks. And what's really important is making sure they have both a unique visual feedback and also an audio feedback. The main reason for this is obviously accessibility, once again, because it can help disabled players that cannot rely on one feedback so they can rely on the other. But in the end, it also helps everyone because it just makes the experience clearer. And as a bonus, it also just makes your game, more juicy. So it's another example of something that has been said a lot, which is that good accessibility and good game design are really hard to separate. So one thing that's really important in the nonogram and Picross game is you keep looking and reading these numbers that are the hints. And in most of the game, we found that they're usually very ambiguous and non-colorblind friendly. And the thing is, after playing many years, you get used to this, like us or many other Picross players, but you don't really, you just accept it. But for us, we realize that for many beginner players, this is one of the points that prevents them from really understanding the game. So what we ended up doing is just redesigning all of them, making sure they all have like non-ambiguous visual, using contrast, outlines, and color, even adding new states to make sure everything on the board is clear at all time. We also try to make sure using black and white filters and colorblind filters that they work as much as possible. We'll discuss a bit more about colorblindness later. And another little detail that we made is you can in the game activate a little legend, the thing you see on the right, which is like what we call the Squeakross reference. And this is just a simple tool that you can use, and it's been used by beginner players that, while still playing, they're still not sure what hints represent what, or maybe a player that comes back after a long break. And this tiny kind of thing are really helping accessibility in the game because it just makes Squeakross once again more accessible compared to other nonograms, and player really said this to us. Another very low-hanging fruits, again, very easy win, is if you think about it for like a few minutes, like player will spend hours, maybe hundreds of hours staring at this screen, which is just a grid with cells, and it can be, in our game especially, it's a bright art style, so it can be tiring on the eyes, So what we just did is an option to add a night mode. It's a very simple thing to do. It required some works because it means we have to readjust all the hint states that we showed before to work with the night mode. But we knew some player would, for example, play on hours on their Steam Deck at night, stuff like this. And this is the kind of stuff that can really strain your eyes. So in the end, we just made this. Sometimes we approach Squeakross more like a software. In many software or even phones, you have night mode because you use them for a long time. And this is another kind of thing that not all players will use, but a lot of players ended up being really grateful for this because it made them less tired and stuff like this. And the last one in this part is native input rebinding. This is an obvious one, but it's often forgotten. And something that to me is really important is not just rely on the system-wide input rebinding that Steam or the Nintendo Switch have, for example. Having a proper native input rebinding menu in your game is really superior because it means that you can control and rebind everything, and you can also match all the prompt and glyph with your art style. So for us, having input rebinding, even in such a simple game as Squeakross, was really important because it meant that player could customize their experience to play with one hand, which is really important. And once again, obviously, it helps player with disabilities, for example, motor disabilities, if they don't have access to, all the buttons or they have special controls. But in the end, it helps all players because I think the majority of players ended up customizing their control because it's a game that you will do the same action for over and over and over. So they end up, for example, adding the undo button on their mouse or just changing the thing. So it's something we think is really important, and way too many games, especially indie games, end up skipping. So these were all the obvious stuff, as we like to call them. There are more obviously, but these were just some of them. And just to recap, it's basically what we could call the surface level annoyance or the easy to fix frustration point. So now let's dive in something a bit more interesting, which is breaking the conventions. So if you played any nonogram games, usually you will know that they have a time limit. And this is from one of the oldest Picross, which is Mario's Picross on the Game Boy. And usually you have to finish the puzzle within a certain amount of time, or you don't get all the rewards, or it depends on the game, but basically that's how it works. And when we were doing research on many of the digital nonograms on Steam, we realized that just pretty much all of them have a timer. So basically just a convention of the genre, like no one questioned it. Some player, if you look at some of the negative review, you will see some player complaining about it. And as player, we always hated this. So after a while, you start asking, why does this mechanic exist? These are supposed to be relaxing puzzles, so it's really strange to have like such a stressful mechanic as a timer in a game like this. And even worse, in some of these games, when you do a mistake, the game will punish you by, for example, adding more time to your timer or stuff like this. And this part specifically, the penalties, is something most players hate. Like if you look at a bunch of reviews or just if you read player experience on forums, they all hate this, but everyone accepts it because it's just part of the genre. So what we did in Squeakross, and it sounds easy, but when you actually implement it, sometimes it's a bit hard because you have to fight something you are just used to in this genre. We ended up removing all the timers, all the penalties, everything. So you are never punished for anything because we think that solving the puzzle is already hard enough. So why even add, extra penalties, especially in a game that wants to be relaxing and, cozy. So in a way, we broke that convention, removing the timers and the penalties, which was really well welcome for new player because they didn't even knew the time thing was the timers were a thing. But for experienced players, they were a bit destabilized. We knew this from the demo and some beta tests we did before. So what we ended up doing is adding an option in the settings to re-enable the timer, and this applies to actually every time we try to change a convention of the genre or something that players are used to, but we wanted to tweak to make the game more accessible. We ended up adding an option to re-enable this. And this allows the players that are really experienced to reactivate all this stuff so they can play the game in an accessible way, if I can say this. But for the new player, what was really important is that the default experience they get when they play Squeakross is what we wanted to give them, which is an accessible puzzle-solving game. And what's funny in a way, compared to, like in many games, you usually go into the settings to activate a bunch of accessibility options. And what we realize is that in the end, in Squeakross, usually if you go in the settings, it's kind of the reverse. You activate the option to make the game less accessible because you make it closer to the other nanograms. But it was still really important because even though we make the game for new players, we wanted to make sure experienced player could still enjoy it. And so, we didn't want to alienate them. So being able to activate all of this was really important, and they really enjoyed it. So, like we mentioned before, in most nanogram games, when you do a mistake, they will usually punish you. But in Squeakross, we don't. Something we did add, though, is we have non-intrusive feedback when you do some certain type of mistakes. That's something we realize when watching player plays on stream other games, or even when we play, is that a lot of time there are certain type of mistakes that you will make when you play too fast and you change your board and it becomes unsolvable. And this mostly happen when you do like a wrong input or a misclicks. And in Squeakross, when we detect this kind of error, we basically just show a non-intrusive, very gentle feedback to tell the player something is wrong with your board. But it's of course something you can turn off. And this specific, very subtle warning for the player really helped new player to the genre really apprehend, the puzzle more with more ease, because already they have to solve the puzzle, but sometimes when you do a wrong input, it can mess up even the puzzle even more. So just by making sure these are taken care of, they can solve the puzzle more easily. And what's interesting is we would think that most experienced players would turn this off directly, like a lot of them did. But it's fun to see experienced players play on Twitch. We watch them play on stream, and they will play really fast, but by playing really fast, sometimes they will do misclicks, and the game will tell them, and they will almost fix it right away after seeing the mistake, the warning, but they don't even realize that they fixed it because of the warning. And overall, when they play, they say that Squeakross feel much better and like less frustrating than most other nanogram, and we truly believe it's because of stuff like this. And finally, the last example about breaking the convention. Something that in most nanogram games is they are usually a tool to show your mistake. So basically you click on this button and it shows which cells on the board are wrong. And in most of those games, there are usually arbitrary limits to this system. It's either you can only use it once, and for most of the games, as soon as you do any inputs like move the joystick or press a button, all the mistakes gets removed from the screen. This always annoys us as players because it feels that most developers do this because they don't want players to cheat, which for us is completely absurd, because if someone wanted to cheat, you would just go online to see the solution, or you would just do these show mistakes, take a screenshot, and in the end it's the same result. So what we do in Squeakross is that we put no restriction on this show mistake feature. So in the end, players are free to cheat, because one obvious exploit of this is that you can fill the whole grid with random cells, like you can all fill with cheese, do show mistakes, and it will basically show you the solution. But we are totally fine with this. We even encourage some players to use this thing with achievements, and it was actually a great success with beginner or new players, because they are never truly stuck in the game. They can always use the help and the assist to help them, and we just see that most experienced players don't want to use them. And what's fun actually is that we will see that some experienced players asked us to remove some achievements related to help, using the help, because of players' pride, I don't know, but they didn't want their friend to know that they use help. But of course we refused, because what we wanted Squeakross to be is to be an accessible puzzle game, and using help is part of the gameplay, and it's totally fine. So I think that was interesting. Finally, we will talk about innovation and how we can lead to new accessibility opportunities by creating new features. And for this, I'm going to give the mic back to Luka.
Thanks, Alex. What innovation means is bringing new feature into the game. While not being entirely new, we innovated with a fresh take on the counting tool. Some other games have a counting feature, but we always find it very lacking. In our game, it works like a tape measure. You click and drag on a line, it shows all the number along the way, and it's locked in that line or column. It can be activated automatically as well, so you can see it while filling cells, and you don't have to press another extra button. It makes it effortless to use, and also relieves the mental load of counting. We really treated it like a core feature, and it's not an optional tool for us. so we can give as many tools as we can to the players, and they can really understand the gameplay and what's going on the grid. It's also really enhanced the readability of the game. And the second feature we developed is called the Logic Assist. It's completely unique to Squeakross. When you activate it, you can select a row or a column, and it will show you all the possible solutions for that line. Players can browse through them and place temporary markings, and it will get applied to the puzzle grid when they exit the Logic Assist mode. The goal of this feature was to allow players to picture the logic behind the hints and learn how to play better. This type of logic puzzles is heavily reliant on visualization, and it can be hard to understand when it's a new concept or just having to keep focus during longer play sessions. Tools like this boost player confidence, and they let them know they are not alone against the puzzle. They can never be truly 100% stuck with this kind of tools. As we said, it's a unique feature to our game, and as far as we know, we're the only nonogram games doing this. We knew from the start that only a very small percentage of the players would use it, and we're fine with it. Even though we knew not everyone would use it, we iterated on it and pushed it to the same level of quality as the rest of the game. Like all the other help features in the game, it has no restriction and you can use it as many times as you want. In the end, we made both of these features to help beginner players, but we realized afterward that it also helped players with disabilities like dyscalculia. We were not aware of that disability, but we were pleased to know that creating these features ended up helping even more players than what we thought it would. This is just one player reaction where he says, "Thank you so much for the game, I can finally enjoy Squeakross while having dyscalculia." This is just one player reaction, but a couple of reviews and people on our Discord also mentioned the game being very fun to enjoy despite their dyscalculia, compared to other nonogram games. And also please enjoy the cute rat pics. Obviously, we're not perfect, and we still have many things we can do to improve. And I'm just going to show you a non-exhaustive list. But for example, we are lacking a true colorblind mode. We would like to rely even less on colors for the hint numbers. We want to add the zoom support to make larger puzzles even more readable on smaller screens and allow us to make bigger puzzle grids. We also want to add touch controls for Switch and Steam Deck. And we're still working on those 2 points. It's kind of hard to implement as well. We tried many other puzzle games, but so far we haven't seen any of them implementing it in a way that we truly find accessible and effortless to use. And during production, we worked with Game Accessibility Hub. They're a game accessibility consultant, and they provided us with a great detailed report with playtests from various disabled players. While we tried to address as much as the feedback as we could, there are still areas for improvements. They were great to work with, and I heavily suggest getting in touch with them. Some of the feedback can be eye-opening, and it will improve your game and make it better for everyone. Now let's wrap it up with some takeaways. The first one is designing with accessibility in mind as early as possible will only make the game better. Don't treat accessibility like a patch on top of your game. Think about it from the start. Challenge convention of your game's genre. It can lead to innovation and more accessibility. Ask yourself questions. Why is it designed like this? Is it really necessary? Can I break that rule? What can I do to improve and make it more approachable for newer players to this type of game? Common players' frustration can often hide accessibility or game design problems. One good way to find these is to gather negative reviews from players of similar games, and you can try to extract the more common frustration. You will be surprised at how often it is tied to accessibility problems. And last one, get in touch with accessibility consultants. They know best how to handle the subject, and they will help you get a completely different perspective on your game and guide you through this journey. That was it from us. Thank you everyone for joining our talk, and if you have any question, you can find us on Blue Sky or send us an email. Get in touch. Thank you.